struggling with ever-increasing personal, family, and social complexities of contemporary life. Dr. Yahnke is a licensed clinical psychologist who's provided consultation to district presidents, pastors, principals, teachers, congregations. Some of us in this room have had her as an instructor at Concordia. She served as professor of psychology and served as department chair at Concordia University, Wisconsin. And she's had over 20 years in the private practice at the clinic she founded, Christian Counseling Services in Milwaukee. So if you could please give me a warm welcome, to Dr. Bev Yahnke.
It is an absolute pleasure to be here, and I recognize this is your first day back. I'm so sorry. I know you've been ripped in an untimely way from your celebration of all of the 12 days of Christmas, and so most of you probably have already had your brain in snooze at about, lunchtime, right? Okay. We're going to take a look at something that's really remarkably interesting, called the Transgender Child, which is a very cutting issue in the circles where I spend some time. But I'm going to start with one assumption, that we as a church begin in love, we act in love, we do in love, we reach out in love, and we like that to be one very common, harmonious kind of message. Let's see what that looks like. You are group 1. You are group 2. You are group 3. And none of you win a car. I'm very sorry, all right? Group 1, here is your note. La, la, ah. Mormon Tabernacle Choir has nothing on the Lutherans, okay. That's what harmony sounds like. That's what we long for. That's what we want. That's what we need. But instead, we don't always speak with one voice. We often have many different opinions about many different things. Each of you has your own favorite note. Mine happens to be F sharp. I don't know what your favorite note is. I want you to keep it in your mind. I'm going to count to 3. I want you to sing your favorite note. 1, 2, 3. Stop that. That's not nearly as lovely as the harmony of the church. The harmony of the church is our Lord's care and love and message of redemption for us. But what we just heard there is the fact there are many different voices and many different perspectives, and not all of them agree with the harmonious perspective of our Lord, particularly when it comes to the matter of Christian sexuality. There's all kinds of conflict on the matter of sexuality. That's no secret to anybody. And we're going to talk today about the transgender child and teen, because I've been spending a lot of time talking with high school teachers and principals and pastors about transgender teens. I got a phone call not so long ago from a principal who said this: "Well, Dr. Yahnke, I think I have a problem." I said, "Well, you are a school principal." Yeah, it all comes with the title. And what he told me was, there's a boy that I have at school. His name is Carl. He's 10 years old. Very shy, very slight of frame, very much of an introvert. And he's always seemed to prefer spending time with the girls instead of the boys. And he said, I just got an email from his parents which says, and I quote, "We have some clear requirements about what's necessary for Carl in the weeks ahead. Beginning on Monday, we need some changes because Carl has told us he's always been a boy on the outside, but he feels like a on the inside." Exactly right. And he said, so we want to help Carl transition. So here are his requests: that all of his teachers, beginning on Monday, now call him Kelly. And that beginning on Monday, he's going to start dressing in female clothes. Although if you guys look around, it's pretty unisex, right? hoodies, not jeans, khakis, that Carl is going to start using the girls' bathroom on Monday, and Carl is going to start using the girls' locker room on Monday, and we would like you to get all of your teachers on board with that plan. Well, it's a Lutheran school, and Lutheran school who understand very clearly what our Lord tells us in Genesis when he says, male and female, God created us. And there wasn't an option for opting out. But we need to talk about this because largely you guys are going to come across some transgender teens and some transgender children if you have not already. And by the close of our time together, you are really going to be equipped to move away from the myths, to move away from the falsehoods, and to be able to offer some real encouraging information and Christian support to kids who are struggling. Not many people are talking about this unless they're confronted with a transgender child. It's kind of like, don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion, don't talk about sex, until you have to. But people are whispering about it, and they're shouting about it on television, but informed conversation is hard to come by. Our world has changed pretty dramatically in the last 20 years, guys, and you've been a part of that change. You don't really understand what has happened. It's been kind of boring before you got here on planet Earth. It's more exciting now. But we need to start talking about transgender kids by looking at where we've been. Boom! Any of you know the name Norman Rockwell? He was an artist, always used to draw some lovely, homey scenes about life as it should be, life as it could be. And here's a depiction he has of your basic average boy and girl doing boy and girl things. And what happens is that is a bubble that has burst long ago. And as you all know, and your teachers have been telling you, what we understand is our culture has largely rejected the truth of God's will for us and has largely rejected God's word and his plan for our lives. And in fact, we as Christians are now pretty much in a minority part of the culture. We no longer have the prevailing worldview that we once did. And that's kind of a scary thing. Instead, what I'm going to suggest is that we as Christians have a responsibility to protect some kids who need information and to protect some teens who need some guidance and some informed support about what transgender transition means. One of the most outspoken critics is in the American Pediatric Association. She's a physician. And here's what she says. She says, America is engaged in large-scale child abuse. And she said, and everyone seems to make it worse. Psychiatrists, teachers, principals, mass media, social media, everybody is on board with this child abuse. And there's a sexual revolution that's going on all around us, and you're aware of it. And we don't fight against it. We simply proclaim the truth. We speak the truth. How? In love. Always in love. We start in love. We speak in love. We confront in love. We support in love and help in love. So transgender kids need some assistance. Let's look at this phenomenon a little bit more closely. How many transgender kids are we talking about? How big is this phenomenon? Well, the most recent research says less than 1% of all children and all teens fit the criteria for a transgender child. Less than 1%. And yet, with the number of legislation, bills going through, and the amount of attention being given to this, you would think 50% of the kids in the world are transgender. So in our nation, we're talking about 150,000 to 200,000 kids, which is still a lot. But let's compare that to one other statistic. 14% of kids are engaged in binge drinking. 1% are transgender. Mothers Against Drunk Driving can no longer get free airtime, can no longer get public service messages, can no longer interest people in their cause because it's no longer anti-cultural. It's no longer trendy. Now we want to talk about the sexual revolution, even though 14% of kids are still struggling with drinking. We get a pretty good perspective of what's happening in the world of transgender children when we think about what's happened in the last couple of years. One gentleman, his name is Dr. Paul McHugh, and he had been the chairman of psychiatrics for Johns Hopkins. Hotshot, smart guy, really bright dude. He was a pediatrician by training, and he said, you know, I've had 50 years as a pediatrician. And he said, I surveyed 28 of my colleagues who are also pediatricians. He said, together, the group of us had over 931 years of clinical experience. And in all of that time, there were 12 transgender children. That's pretty tiny, wouldn't you say? And of that 12, 10 of those kids had very serious psychological problems. The other 2 kids had been severely abused when they were children. All right? 12 kids over a period of decades. And so it says in 50 years, in the last 50 years, here's what the level of transgender children have looked like. Not many, not many, not many, not many, not many. Explosion in the last 10 years. In terms of history, we recognize that that's a pretty significant deal. Let's look at how we've kind of popularized what's been going on. 2011, some of you were still just toddling around. Some of you may be aware of Chastity Bono, who became Chaz. So he was one of the first men to chest feed his baby, which is lovely. We had Bruce Jenner in 2015. Most of you are probably familiar with that, where we had ESPN awarding him, her, whomever, with the Arthur Ashe Courage Award. So this is now very mainstream. It's very popular. Everybody's interested and supportive of it. Right? And in the background, the sexual revolution is everywhere you look. One of the most conservative publications for decades has been National Geographic's. They usually looked at lions and tigers and bears, oh my, and cultures that are fascinating. These days, even they are talking about gender. Let me start with an unpleasant statement, but one that's true. Presuming that we change our gender is really a complete attack on God's plan for us. It is a complete attack on God's creation as He intended it. And I would hope that in the days ahead, perhaps some of your teachers will be talking with you more about why that is true. I'm going to move in a little bit of a different direction and say, why do we need a Christian response to transgender children? We're all about the way, the truth, the life, the Lord. And that's as it should be. There are some Christian groups that are now saying LGBT should really stand for letting go of biblical truth. That's not what it stands for, but it certainly challenges biblical truth in every possible way. The LGBT agenda says, you know, we need to separate gender from sex. We need to separate sex from marriage. You don't have to have those go together. We need to separate marriage from conception. We don't need to have those go together anymore. And we need to sever conception from birth. It's a radical agenda, and it flies in the face of God's will for us. So our culture has really been promoting the fact that sexually and behaviorally, we can do anything we want. Why? Because, not a very well-informed answer, but it's kind of what it is. We need to take a look at what is the truth, what's the perspective from the area of medicine and psychology. Let's look at that. Why don't I get out of the way? All You have probably heard from your biology teacher that males and females are different. Most of you knew that. If not, see me after and we'll talk. All right. What does the word male mean? Well, biologically, you know what that means. It means you have a normal X chromosome, you have a normal Y chromosome. Boom, you've got a male. What does being a girl mean biologically? You have two X chromosomes, you put those together, boom, you've got a female. And we think, well, that's very nice. Get this. Our biological sex, our chromosomal identification is stamped on every single cell in our bodies, all the way from our toes to the tip of our heads. Every single cell is branded as male or as female. And what we also need to know is there are 6,500 genetic differences between men and women. So simply changing one's outer appearance doesn't do a thing to change those 6,500 genetic differences. So we know what sex is. It's chromosomes. It's stamped on all of our cells. The differences are real. So what's gender? We've got the two X chromosomes, boom, a girl. And so we've got girls that love fairy princesses and cooking and knitting and putting on superhero women's capes, and they love dolls and crafts and all that neat stuff. That's a gender identification with their biological sex. What in our culture do many girls do? That's gender. Boys have a different type of gender. They love blowing things up. They love stomping in mud puddles. They love experimenting with things and tools and hammers and feats of strength, and those are guy gender things, which our culture says that's what a lot of guys in our culture like and do. So here's the problem. So what happens if I'm a girl on the outside, but on the inside, I really secretly want to play baseball, have my very own frog, and want to wear Batman shirts, dun-da-da-da? Then what? What if I'm a girl and I want to play baseball and have a frog? Well, that means you're a girl who plays baseball and you want to have a frog. It does not mean you're a boy trapped in a girl's body. Same is true for boys. What if you're a boy and you happen to be the best Christmas cookie baker in your entire neighborhood? What happens if you're a boy and you're able to knit someone into the ground and create an incredibly gorgeous mural? What if you're a boy and you just happen to have an incredible love for music and opera? It means you're a boy who likes doing some things that some guys don't. It does not mean you're a boy with a girl trapped on the inside. Based on this kind of evidence, I'm a girl and I like to play baseball. There are children who have said, I need to transition to the other sex. And so you guys now know the difference and can say to your friends, can say to an acquaintance, that's nuts. You can like anything you like, and it doesn't mean you have to change your biological sex. For people who feel that way and it's very uncomfortable for them, in our world of psychology, we have a diagnosis for it. We have a label for it. It's called gender dysphoria. Translation, I don't really like the way I feel about my gender and my biological sex. They conflict. They don't go well together. So what if I have a gender identity, frogs and baseball, and I'm a girl? What does that mean? There's a book in psychology, those of you who want to become clinical psychologists, and I encourage you to think about it because Christian psychologists are desperately needed. So in the world of psychology, we have a book called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's a 900-page book, and in it has every single diagnosis for mental illness and all the criteria necessary. It's a fun read, you know. What do I want to do today? Boom. Oh, schizophrenia. No. All right. It's also a great paperweight, all right? But in this book, when we look up gender dysphoria, here's what we find as a diagnosis. Incompatibility with the gender a person was born with. In other words, I'm a girl and I like frogs. And I felt that way for 6 months, and it makes me very uncomfortable, and I don't like it. That's a part of the diagnosis. The second part of the diagnosis is, I really now want to be a boy, even though I'm a girl. That's what the diagnosis is all about. So the current chief qualification is, I just don't like the way that I feel. And that invites counseling. It invites care, it invites spiritual care, it invites psychological care in a loving way. What instead seems to be happening is there is an epidemic of boys who say they feel like girls and girls who say that they feel like boys. And I do mean that it is an epidemic. The number of kids feeling this way is just growing by leaps and bounds. Until 10 years ago, let your mind wrap around this, having an adolescent girl say, I feel like a boy, it never had happened until 10 years ago. Usually gender dysphoria starts in little children. And now they were finding adolescent girls for the very first time were saying, I feel like a boy inside, I must need to transition. So it's out of the blue, and it's happening everywhere. In 2007, there was one hospital in the United States that treated transgender children. It was in Boston. One hospital. In 2017, there were 45 hospitals dedicated to the treatment of transgender kids. So you see the multiplication of this impact going throughout the population. The largest hospital for transgender kids is currently in Los Angeles. Why are we not surprised? It's in Los Angeles, and they are currently treating 725 trans children. The youngest patient, get this, save this on your hard drive, the youngest child being treated is 3 years old. That's crazy! And I'm licensed to make those judgments. All right. I know it when I see it. All right. So there are now doctors saying the new transgender phase isn't about really being transgender. It's a socially contagious phenomenon. And you get it from other kids. It's a fad. And it's spreading in a contagious kind of way. Because the media love it, and counselors love it, and doctors get on board. And get this, for a child who is transgender and who's been experiencing some difficulties fitting in, perhaps with his peer group, and suddenly a boy says, I really am a girl inside, that child gets more attention than he has gotten in the last 5 years. Everyone clusters around the child, encourages him, helps him, points the way forward, is so excited for him, and admires his courage in talking about being a transgender individual. So it is almost an epidemic, a contagion. It's distress at least, all right? The psychiatrists who are looking at this now are saying, you know what's happening? We have kids who are seriously depressed. We have kids who are struggling with anxiety. We have kids who have all kinds of genuine hurts going on that have been neglected and unattended to. And gender dysphoria is the new way for dealing with those hurts. If you have no other takeaway, take that. We have kids who are depressed, kids who are anxious, kids who are bullied, kids who aren't fitting in. And the moment they proclaim themselves to be transgender kids, they have been coping with everything that was wrong, and everything changes for them. And suddenly they're the center of all kinds of positive attention. Well, maybe that's a good thing. I mean, it's better than, taking drugs, or it's better than cutting, or better than drinking, or starving yourself. Maybe that is a good way to respond to emotional pain. Not true. The data tell us something really scary, guys. What they tell us is this. Individuals who identify as transgender, at some point in their life, either before or after they transition, 41% of everyone who identifies as transgender will attempt suicide. That's almost half, almost 1 out of every 2 kids. That is stunning. Whether they transition or not, they are going to have a huge likelihood of being suicidal, all right? So we would prefer that kids not move towards that identification. So am I saying gender dysphoria is pathological? Yeah, I kind of am. Gender dysphoria belongs in the same family of similarly disordered assumptions about the body, such as anorexia nervosa. This is the best example I can probably give you. If we have a child who says, or a teen who says, I am a transgender child and need to transition to the opposite sex, we say, that's fantastic, we're on board, let's do everything we can to help you, we'll provide you the best care, the best medical treatment, let's help you transition. If we have a teen with anorexia, the teen is saying, I don't like my body image. I can't identify with my body image. My body image is uncomfortable for me. I have to change my body image. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to diet, and I'm not going to eat, and I may engage in all kinds of really objectionable ways of throwing up food after I've eaten. I'm going to work out till I burn 4,000 calories a day. And we do not put anorexic teens on a high-calorie burning diet. We do not put anorexic teens on a low-calorie diet. We don't let them make changes to their body because the change to their body will hurt them. When we've got transgender kids, we say, sure, change your body. Let's do whatever we can. The cause is identical. For anorexic kids, I don't feel like I belong in this fat body, so I'm going to get rid of the fat. Transgender kids, I don't believe that I'm really a girl, so I'm going to get rid of all the girl parts and become a boy. Both of those ways of thinking are delusional. What's delusion mean? It is a fixed, false belief. The anorexic really believes she is fat. She weighs 100 pounds. She's 5'1", and a wind gust could blow her away. And she isn't based in reality. The transgender child is in the same tough spot, not based in reality. Bottom line, you don't treat a delusion by changing the body. You don't change the body when the mind is confused. Why not? I was going to show you a video, but it was so disturbing I couldn't do it. There's a video, you may want to check it online when you get home if you're in a mood, but it's about a gentleman who didn't feel as if his physical body was right. He said, I don't feel like a person. I identify with a fish. I am a fish trapped in a man's body. Now, most people can hear that and say, well, that's stupid. All right, well, that's not very loving. So we say, I'm so sorry you feel that way. Let's talk about it. Boy, is that stupid. No, you don't say that part. All right? Because all of us know, unless you've just gone to a fish fry on Friday, you don't have a fish trapped in your body trying to get out. So what this guy has done, and I just took a slide from the video. This is what's happened when a person has a false belief about what they think they are. He thinks he's a what? Fish. And so the tattoos that you see there around the eyes, the scales that have been tattooed on the shoulder and the arms and other body parts, I assure you. All right, and you see the tattooing around the eyes, how the lips have been artificially enlarged to the point of being ridiculous. And now look, where are his ears? His ears were surgically removed. How many fish do you know have ears? How did this happen? He walked into a physician's office and said, I feel like a fish. And the doc said, okay, we can work on that. That's a different kind of mental illness. And now some physicians are being called unethical, irresponsible for engaging in this type of surgery. Even in plastic surgery, you know, say somebody is going to have plastic surgery of one sort or another done, that person has to have a psychological evaluation first to be sure that their expectations are okay, they're looking at reality in an appropriate way. Transgender teens and transgender kids never have a psychological evaluation. Guess who else didn't have a psychological evaluation? All right? This is the take-homeable, guys. This says, even if you don't feel on the inside the way you look on the outside, you don't treat delusions surgically and medically. Treat them psychologically first and foremost. Well, let's say we've got a family and we've got someone who is a little boy who says, I'm a girl on the inside. Let's look very carefully at exactly what happens. So here we have the story of a little boy. Boom, now he is a little girl, or he's being groomed to become a little girl. How many little girls do you know have hair that color? I don't know any. So we recognize there's something more than just wanting to be a girl going on. There's something going on here that says, I need, would you say attention? Yeah, good. I don't see any pink hair here. I feel so much better about that. Okay. But let's say we've got a little guy who says, I'm really a girl on the inside. What is the first thing that happens? You see a doctor, and the doctor says, well, let's humor him for a while. Let's just see how things go. First, let him pick out a girl's name. He can start wearing girls' clothes. Send a note to the school that you want all the pronouns used for your child to be female pronouns. And tell them that you want your child to be able to use the girls' bathroom. That's step one. And people say, well, you know, he may get tired of it and he may revert back to being a boy. Here's what the data tell us, that once you start on the pathway, changing pronouns, changing clothes, changing names, changing locker rooms, the likelihood of changing back, it doesn't happen. It's like you get on this conveyor belt, and once you get on it, boom, there you go. What's the next thing that happens? Let's look at the 3 stages of treatment. First stage of treatment, so we've got a boy who thinks he's really a girl on the inside. First thing that happens after we try out the new dress, the new name, and the new locker room is that puberty blockers are used. They're hormone blockers. Certain age, we go through puberty, right? The hormones dance, and little girls become more woman-like, and little boys become more man-like. As a part of God's perfect creation, we move towards becoming reproductive adults, which is exactly what's intended to be. Instead, if you've got a little boy who thinks he's a girl, he gets some injections with hormone-blocking drugs. And that means the little boy is not going to experience puberty. His friends are going through puberty and are starting to look more like men, and he remains very little boy. Thin shoulders, thin neck, very thin hips, very high voice. All right? So we prevent him from moving into manhood. He doesn't get to experience the cool stuff about seeing your shoulders getting broader and being able to grow some guys actually call them beards. I call them, oh my heavens, what's on your face, who can grow some of that stuff going on, you know, so their shoulders get, and Guys, what happens to your voice at about age 13, 14? You go from this to this. All right, it's a boom. Where did my child go? Hi, mother, I'm now a man. Don't scare me anymore. All right. So if you've got a child on hormone blockers, none of that happens. And all the boys around him start becoming more and more man-like. And the kid on hormone blockers says, see, I'm not like them. He becomes less and less like his friends every single day, confirming for him he really is a girl on the inside. Here's the really strange part. Do you know how states generally have laws to regulate what kids can and can't do? For example, you guys will know the answer to this. I don't know the answer. How old do you have to be to get a piercing without parent consent? 13, is it? 18. Okay, 13 scared me just a little bit. All right, 18. Do you know how old you have to be to get on to a puberty blocking program? There's no law about it at all. There is no regulation medically, statewide, or nationwide to prevent anyone who's in a mood from starting hormone blocking drugs at any age they want. All right? And want to hear something scarier still? Even to get an ear piercing, how old do you have to be for that? 18, right? Without parent consent? Or is it 16 in some states, maybe? For kids who want to transition, in many states, no parent consent is required. And in fact, in some states, if you say, I'm a boy and I'm really a girl inside, and the parents say, I don't think so, the state will take custody of the child and ensure that the child can transition, even if the parents say, absolutely not. So in some places, parents can lose custody of their children if parents forbid them to transition to the other sex. So we start with hormone blockers, and parents are told, well, this is reversible. There's not a single study I've found to support that. And generally people say this gives confused children more time to think about who they really want to be. It freezes a child in childhood and prevents them from growing into what God has planned for them to be. So we ultimately have to move to phase 2. So instead of our own naturally supplied hormones, girls estrogen, boys testosterone, if you're a boy who thinks you're a girl on the inside, you start getting cross-sex hormones. You start getting female hormones. You start getting estrogen implants, estrogen injections. And the research to date says it just about 100% of the time results in that child being sterile for the rest of their lives. So this is nothing to mess around with. These are irreversible, life-changing, ghastly decisions that are being made. And once you start those hormones, you generally have to stay on them for the rest of your life. All right? So there are no state laws preventing cross-sex hormone administration. And if parents disagree with this, they can be charged with child neglect if they won't allow their teen to go ahead and get the treatment that he wants. Lose custody of their child. All right, well, what happens after you've had the cross-sex hormones for a number of years? Sexual surgery. And I will let your imagination answer what body parts are remodeled. Right? Generally, surgery is at age 18. And it's largely an amputation of all the primary and secondary sexual characteristics. And the surgery is irreversible. Now, everyone as a teenager is entitled to do some really stupid stuff. You didn't hear that from me. But after being a counselor for 3 decades, I will tell you, most teenagers do something at least unexpected once in their life. Right? The thing that you do that's unexpected should not ruin the rest of your natural life and your ability to marry someone, to have a family with someone. So what are the outcomes of treatment? What do we know that happens to kids who do this? Look at what the Journal of the American Medical Association said in September of 2017. It is impossible to recommend gender transitioning to minors as evidence-based or even safe. So an awful lot of doctors are now saying, we have no idea what the long-term impact of this is. We don't even know what the safety of this is. We can't recommend it. One of the very first studies to look at the long-term impact of what was going on ended up saying, we can't find enough kids to track. We don't know what's happening to them. It's like moving into this world where you've got no GPS at all. We'll transition you. All right, now you're a girl. Good luck. That's about all the research we have. Well, that's not a good way to change your life, right? It reminds me the surgical, excitement to change kids to the opposite sex. Have any of you heard of a lobotomy? Have you heard the word? Let me see hands. Okay, maybe about half of you. None of you have had one. That's good. All right. Lobotomies were huge in, say, the 1950s. Lobotomies were a surgical procedure that was done in a really ghastly way. No, you can't do this at home, but I'll tell you what it is. You take a surgical instrument, you insert it up one nostril along the side of the nose, through the corner of the eye socket, and up into the forebrain. And then you do this. And then you take the surgical instrument out. They use that procedure for people who are depressed. They use that procedure for people who are having anxiety episodes. They use that procedure for boys who are having the same kind of behaviors as hyperactive ADD kids. They used it for people who weren't motivated, and they used it for people who were aggressive. Man, is that stupid. And it, boom, moved through the whole United States. And suddenly, all kinds of people were buying brand new instruments and going. And what happened after they treated these people? Aggressive people were no longer aggressive. Depressed people were no longer depressed. Anxious people were no longer anxious. Hyperactive kids were no longer hyperactive. What instead they found is all of that went away, and what they got was this. That's not a very good outcome. But the depression was gone, the anxiety was gone, hyperactivity was gone, and the aggression was gone. So was the person. Details matter, all right? So it wasn't until about the mid-60s they finally started looking at years of data and saying, this is nuts. And they stopped doing it. My guess is this, guys. My guess is that 10 years from now, hopefully it won't take that long, 10 years from now, there's going to be a body of data that people look at and say, this is a disaster. Transitioning kids has got to stop. It's irresponsible. It's abusive. I hope that's what will happen, and I hope it doesn't take 10 years. The individual who is head of the pediatrics organization said something that's kind of important, actually. Let's bring that up. 98% of gender-confused boys, if you do nothing, no hormones, no treatment, no hormone blockers, no surgery, 98% of boys will just move through that period of discontent and be just fine with no treatment at all. For girls, 88% of gender-confused girls eventually accept their biological sex after they've naturally gone through puberty and adolescence. So why are we getting out the scissors and the drugs if 98% of kids that are boys and 88% who are girls are just fine without radical treatment? And experts will say, if you don't allow your child to move through with this transitioning request of his or hers, he or she is likely to commit suicide. Now, if you were a parent Parents love their children more than they love their own lives, right? And so if a parent hears their child is going to be suicidal if they don't transition, the parent generally does everything possible to help the child transition. And that's really problematic, okay? So leave them alone and provide them with the appropriate kind of support instead. Why? There is no proof that radical therapies will prevent these adolescents from attempting suicide. So the takeaway is this, dear people. We have to start paying attention to mental health of the people around us. If there are people who are incredibly unhappy and depressed, the first thing we do isn't send them off for hormones and scissors. First thing we do is we care about them. We love on them. We bring them to the attention of a counselor, a school counselor, a teacher. We bring them to the attention of our parents who can serve as advocates to be sure that kid gets some care. All right? Every single one of you has the capacity to identify a peer who may be struggling and no one knows it. An awful lot of kids that I've seen through the years clinically put on what? The mask? I'm fine, I'm cool, I'm okay, no problem. All right? And they take off the mask in their room at night and their heart's breaking. If you know somebody who's in pain, don't keep it a secret. Reach out to a teacher, reach out to your parent, reach out to a counselor, because mental health services are fantastic. We know for a fact 1 out of every 5 adolescents often has an episode of depression. All right? And it is fleeting. It is not lifelong. I should have been more accurate. 1 out of every 5 females and about 13% of males. Okay? And those numbers have just gone off the charts in the last 10 years. So we know that mental health needs are hugely important. All right? So we have to start being sure that we're taking care of people's mental health when we care for them before we move to drugs and scissors. Okay? So you guys now have the facts. You may be some of the best well-informed people in Sheboygan about transitioning children and transgender children. The story about adults who are already transgender, those are different facts, that's different information. We're talking about kids and teens. You know the truth about it. So if you're aware of a girl or a boy who is leaning in this direction, mental health help and spiritual care help are the most important strategies that you can offer to be sure they get the assistance that they need. How do we respond in love? Well, first, be well-informed. We've got a good share of that covered this afternoon. Secondly, don't accept the myth. And the myth is you'll be so much better once you're a boy. You won't ever be depressed again once you're a girl. Oh, really? The suicide rates after transition are even higher. All right? So don't buy into the myths or support them. You know the dangers. So how do we as Christians help? We love on people. We teach them. We put them in touch with information that's accurate with adults who get the big picture. We pray with them. We pray for them. We befriend them. And here's a takeaway. It's not about judgment. It's not, oh, you. That would really brighten the day, right? You're what? Wow, you are totally screwed up, aren't you? You're a total loser, right? That is not how we love on people, right? We love on people by saying, that sounds really hard. And here are the best words you can say to anybody who's struggling, because a lot of teens I know say, I don't know what to say. I don't have the words. I don't know what to say. The words of love that aren't judgment are this. Tell me more about that. All right? It says, I'm listening. That says, I care. It says, I'm willing to walk with you through this. Tell me more about that. And we're sure to end with the news, you have a good and loving God who's going to do everything humanly possible to help you in this moment and every moment that awaits you. How do we know that? He told us that. How do you know that? It's in the big book. Right? We take our God at his word, a God of love who does not abandon us. What is our church body doing? here in South Wisconsin District, Michigan District, other districts, they're trying to put together lists of people to refer to, lists of counselors who understand what transgender issues are about, and who aren't going to say, well, let's help you transition. That would be fine. One psychiatrist said this, you know, if I go into my doctor's office and I say to my doctor, hello, I'm Donald Trump, the doctor will say, you're psychotic and you need medicine, all right? It's not that hard, right? She said, if, however, I go into my doctor and I say to my doctor, hi, I think I'm a woman on the outside and a man on the inside, he'll say, well, let's help you transition, all right? So we need to identify people who get it, who will help people understand that watchful waiting matters. So there are an awful lot of counselors. We need to be really careful. Most counselors have never seen a transgender child. Most doctors have never seen a transgender kid. They've been pretty rare. In my entire clinical practice of over 35 years, I've only seen 3 kids who are transgender kids, right? And you know what? There's no protocol, there are no guidelines for how to treat them. We don't know how to help them transition the most wisely. And so my word of wisdom is we don't help them transition, we find out what it is that God has in store for them. We know that He created them male or female, and we're going to help them find their way back to that biblical identity. We know for a fact that districts, some are starting to compile lists. I'm going to add one thing in I didn't mention and should have. So go on rewind for a second. All right, rewind says, when we look at transgender boys, they started studying moms of transgender boys. Remember the picture I showed you where the little boy had become a girl with pink hair? Mom was the prime mover on that. Mom thought he looked adorable. Mom thought he was such a tender spirit, he'd fare better as a child. When we look at the moms of transgender children, the data tell us something alarming. The data tell us that 50% of the moms with gender dysphoric boys have 2 or more mental health diagnoses. That's huge. Another 25% of moms with gender dysphoric boys have 3 or more mental health diagnoses. One of the most essential helps and ties to reality is a parent who speaks the truth in love to his or her child. So we recognize an awful lot of moms are going to need our care as well, so they don't start promoting the wrong stuff. What's happening in our universities? Universities are just starting to talk about this. A few years ago, when I was teaching at Concordia Mequon, walked into the dean's office and I said, who on campus, I mean there are hundreds of faculty members between Ann Arbor and Mequon, who on our campus is expert in Christian education and Christian sexuality? Who's on top of that? And the dean said, let me get back to you. The dean's a very bright dude. Okay. A couple days later, he came to my office and he said, well, here's the name of somebody who might be helpful. I said, teaching Christian sexuality, beginning to create curriculum that goes all the way from K3 all the way through high school. He says, well, talk to him, see what he knows. Walked to this guy's office. Hi, Dean says, you're at Christian sexuality. You're the go-to guy. He said, what? He said, no. He said, my dad's a pastor. Does that help? No, no one's working on it. No one's thinking about it. What our universities need to be doing is preparing teachers for the next generation of kids who are confronting this. What our universities need to be doing as well is creating a curriculum so that beginning at K3, Christian sexuality is something we teach with joy. It's not happening in most Lutheran schools for all kinds of reasons, oddly enough. An awful lot of Lutheran school boards, PTOs, parent-teacher organizations, are saying, You are not going to teach sexuality to my children. How many of you have come through a K through 8 Lutheran school? Oh, everybody. All right. Nearly everybody. Now give me a show of hands. How many of you had any kind of curriculum from kindergarten to 4th grade on Christian sexuality? Look around, folks. How many of you had any curriculum grades 5 through 8 on Christian sexuality? We've got 6 hands in here, and there's the problem. All right, we have 8 hands. All right. We're not teaching what our Lord teaches us because parent organizations are afraid. I don't want people teaching my kids stuff I don't believe. All right? But we have to pay attention to the fact that Christian curriculum is important. So we've got to get teachers, pastors, and principals aware of the facts and helping them to create information that's valuable. We need to have parents talking to kids about this, ensuring that kids get it, the kids know what Christian sexuality is all about. I'm going to even have a tougher question for you now. Usually when parents talk to the parent-teacher organizations, they say, no Christian sexuality in this school. We will not teach any of that. We want to teach that at home in depth with our children. As a Christian psychologist, I found very few kids had ever had more than the talk with their mom and dad. Never had had an extended talk about God's intention for marriage, God's vision for men, God's vision for women. How many of you had more than the talk with your parents? Aha, she said. No wonder we don't know what's happening. We're not talking about it. Christian sexuality is going to be one of the new areas of curriculum development for everybody in the very, very near future. In the 2 minutes we have left, what I want to do is affirm that you are in one of the finest educational institutions available for learning what it means to be a Christian man and learning what it means to be a Christian woman. And that all of you can embrace that, take that with you, and all of you can serve as remarkable examples and really helpful guides to some of your peers who are struggling. We have a gospel that frees people, that heals people. Kids need to know that if they're struggling. We have a gospel that makes people whole again. Kids need to know that if they're struggling. And kids need to know as well that, first and foremost, Jesus Christ is the friend of all of us, and no one will ever be alone. And you may be the only person that tells someone that. So this is about being informed about transgender kids, being unapologetic about sharing the truth, speaking it in love, and doing the best that you can to ensure no one is harmed if they don't need to be. Because we have a God who said, I promise that I will equip you thoroughly for the doing of my will. And that's what we're about. We're about doing his will. And we have his promise, which he keeps. He has, he does, he will. Expect blessing. Take care of yourself and your friends. Thanks for letting me spend some time with you guys. Could I ask one more thing? I feel a Facebook photo coming on, not a selfie, that says, this is how many kids wish their schools had talked about Christian sexuality. Could you stand and wave, please? Wave. Yes, thank you. Oh, you're beautiful. All right, now I've got evidence. Have a great back to school, guys.